Kind stranger buys shoes for orphan girl. What happens next stuns everyone around. The small-town shoe store bustled with weekend shoppers, the hum of chatter and the soft squeak of sneakers on the polished floor filling the air. Among the crowd was Lila, a 10-year-old girl with large, curious eyes and a shy smile. She stood by the display rack, her fingers brushing against a pair of bright red shoes with Velcro straps. They weren't fancy, but to her, they were perfect. She glanced at the price tag and quickly pulled her hand away. Lila knew better than to hope for something she couldn't afford. The shoes she wore, worn-out hand-me-downs with peeling soles, were the only pair she had, and even they were too small now. Her toes cramped against the front, making every step a reminder of what she lacked. From across the store, Ethan watched the scene unfold. He wasn't shopping for himself. He was here to pick up a pair of sturdy work boots for his new job as a handyman. He had spotted Lila lingering near the shoe rack earlier, her posture tentative, her eyes filled with longing. Something about her struck a chord deep within him. Perhaps it was the way she carried herself, as though trying not to be noticed, or the unmistakable look of someone who had learned to expect very little. Ethan approached slowly, his rugged frame towering over the petite girl. "You've got good taste," he said, his voice warm but cautious, not wanting to startle her. Lila turned to him, clutching the strap of her small canvas bag. "Oh, I was just looking," she mumbled, her cheeks flushing. "Nothing wrong with looking," Ethan replied. He crouched down to her level, nodding toward the red shoes. "They look like they'd fit you just right." She hesitated, glancing at him with wide eyes. "They're nice," she admitted softly. "But I don't need them." Ethan studied her for a moment, noticing the frayed hem of her dress and the patches on her sweater. He smiled gently. "How about I get them for you?" Lila's eyes widened, and she shook her head quickly. "Oh no, I couldn't. You don't have to." "I know I don't have to," Ethan said. "But I want to. Let's try them on, see if they're as comfy as they look." For a moment, Lila didn't move. She had learned not to trust kindness, especially from strangers. But something about Ethan's tone was reassuring, and the thought of walking without her toes pinching against the edges of her shoes was too tempting to resist. "Okay," she whispered. Ethan helped her find the right size, his rough hands surprisingly gentle as he opened the shoebox and slipped the red sneakers onto her feet. Lila stood up, taking a tentative step, then another. Her face lit up with a smile so bright it seemed to light up the entire store. "They're perfect," she exclaimed, turning to Ethan with a look of pure joy. "They suit you," he said, standing back to admire her excitement. "Now, let's get them to the counter before they realize how much happiness these shoes are giving you and raise the price." Lila giggled, a sound so light and carefree that it made Ethan's chest ache. As they walked to the register, other shoppers turned to watch, drawn by the heartwarming scene. Some smiled knowingly, while others whispered to one another, touched by the unexpected moment of kindness. At the counter, Ethan handed over the cash, brushing off Lila's timid protests. "Think of it as a gift," he said. "One day, when you pass it on to someone else. Deal?" She nodded solemnly, clutching the shoebox to her chest. "Deal." As they stepped outside the store, Ethan bent down to meet Lila's eyes. "Where are your parents?" he asked gently. "Do they know you're here?" Lila hesitated, looking down at her shoes. "But I don't have parents," she admitted quietly. "I live at the Harper House." Ethan's heart sank. He had heard of the Harper House, the local orphanage that struggled to stay afloat. He had passed it many times on his way to jobs, its weathered sign and peeling paint telling the story of an overburdened, underfunded home. "Well," he said after a moment, "I'm glad I ran into you today. You deserve these shoes and so much more, kid." Lila beamed up at him, her shyness melting away. "Thank you," she said earnestly. "I'll never forget this." As she turned to leave, Ethan felt a strange pull in his chest. He watched her walk away, her steps lighter now, and knew that this moment wasn't just a one-time act of kindness. It was the start of something bigger, though he didn't know exactly what yet. The next day, Ethan found himself standing outside the Harper House, a bag of donated supplies in hand. He hadn't planned on returning, but the thought of Lila and the other children living without basic necessities weighed heavily on him. Mrs. Harper, the matron of the orphanage, greeted him with a mix of surprise and gratitude. "We don't get many visitors," she admitted, showing him inside. The house was clean but worn, its furniture mismatched and its walls lined with handmade decorations crafted by the children. Ethan glanced around, noticing the kids peeking out from doorways, their curious eyes taking him in. "I just wanted to help out a little," he said, handing Mrs. Harper the bag filled with food, school supplies, and toiletries. "I met one of your kids yesterday, Lila. She's a good kid." Mrs. Harper smiled warmly. "She is. Lila's been through a lot, but she's got a spirit that won't quit. She's always helping the younger kids, making sure everyone feels included." Ethan's admiration for Lila grew as he listened. "If there's anything else I can do, let me know," he said. "I've got some free time between jobs, and I'd be happy to pitch in." Mrs. Harper's eyes softened. "We could always use an extra set of hands." Over the next few weeks, Ethan became a regular visitor at the Harper house. He fixed leaky faucets, painted walls, and even built a new bookshelf for the kids' small library. Lila was always by his side, eager to help and quick to share her thoughts. "You're like a superhero," she told him one day as he repaired a broken chair. "You help people and you don't even wear a cape." Ethan chuckled. "I'm just a guy with a toolbox, kid. But thanks for the compliment." As their bond deepened, Ethan found himself looking forward to his visits more than anything else. Lila's laughter and curiosity brought a sense of purpose to his days, and the other children began to see him as a steady presence in their lives. Ethan's visits to the Harper house became a bright spot not just for Lila but for the entire orphanage. The kids grew used to his presence, running to greet him whenever he arrived. He brought small surprises, a new soccer ball, art supplies, or books, and always made time to listen to their stories. For the first time in a long time, the house felt alive with laughter and hope. One evening, as the sun set behind the house, Ethan sat on the porch with Mrs. Harper. They watched Lila and a few of the other children playing tag in the yard, their giggles carrying through the warm air. "Lila's really taken a shine to you," Mrs. Harper said, her tone thoughtful. "She's a special kid," Ethan replied. "Smart kid. She deserves a better shot than what life's handed her." Mrs. Harper sighed, her face clouding with worry. "She's been through so much. We do our best here, but it's not the same as having a family." Ethan nodded, his gaze fixed on Lila. She was chasing another child, her new red shoes kicking up small clouds of dust. The thought of her facing the world without someone to guide and protect her tugged at his heart. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He lay awake, thinking about Lila and the life she deserved. By morning, he had made up his mind. He didn't know if it was possible or if he was even qualified, but he had to try. The following week, Ethan asked Mrs. Harper for a private conversation. She listened quietly as he shared his thoughts, her expression unreadable. "You want to adopt Lila?" she said finally, her voice tinged with surprise. "I know it's a big ask," Ethan admitted, "and I'm not exactly in the best position. I don't have much money, and I'm still rebuilding my life. But I can promise you this, I'll give her everything I have. She deserves someone who will show up for her, day in and day out." Mrs. Harper studied him for a long moment. "You have a good heart, Ethan. But adoption is a long process, and you'll need to meet certain requirements. Are you ready for that?" Ethan nodded. "Whatever it takes." The process was grueling. Ethan spent weeks gathering paperwork, attending parenting classes, and undergoing interviews. There were moments of doubt when he wondered if he was doing the right thing or if he was good enough. But every time he saw Lila, her bright smile and unshakable optimism renewed his determination. Lila, unaware of Ethan's plans, continued to see him as her friend and mentor. They spent hours working on projects together, from building birdhouses to planting a small vegetable garden in the orphanage yard. Ethan found himself imagining what it would be like to share those moments as her father. One afternoon, as they watered the garden, Lila turned to him with a curious look. "Do you have a family, Ethan?" The question caught him off guard, but he answered honestly. "Not anymore. I lost my parents a long time ago, and I don't have any brothers or sisters. It's just me." Lila nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Do you ever get lonely?" "Sometimes," he admitted. But being here with you and the other kids helps. Lila smiled, her eyes twinkling. I think you'd make a good dad. Ethan's breath caught, but he managed to keep his tone light. You think so? Yeah, she said matter-of-factly. You care about people and you always show up. That's what dads are supposed to do, right? Ethan didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached out and ruffled her hair, his heart full. You're a pretty smart kid, you know that? Lila grinned. I've been told. The months passed, and Ethan pushed through every obstacle in the adoption process. There were setbacks and delays, but he refused to give up. His persistence paid off when he received the news he had been waiting for. His application had been approved. On the day of the final meeting, Ethan arrived at the Harper house dressed in his best shirt and carrying a bouquet of flowers for Mrs. Harper. Lila greeted him at the door, her face lighting up when she saw him. You're all dressed up, she said, giggling. What's the occasion? Ethan knelt down so they were eye level. There's something I want to talk to you about, he said, his voice steady but soft. How would you feel about coming to live with me? Permanently. Lila's eyes widened, her smile fading as she processed his words. You mean, like a family? Yeah, Ethan said, his throat tightening. Like a family. Tears filled Lila's eyes, and for a moment, she didn't speak. Then, without warning, she threw her arms around his neck, hugging him tightly. I'd love that, she whispered. Ethan held her close, his own eyes misting. Me too. Me too. Ethan stood, holding Lila's small hand as they entered the courtroom for the final adoption hearing. The atmosphere was formal but warm, and Mrs. Harper and a few of the children from the orphanage had come to support them. Lila glanced up at Ethan, her expression a mix of excitement and nervousness. He gave her hand a gentle squeeze, silently reassuring her. The judge, a kind-looking woman in her 50s, reviewed the file in front of her. Mr. Carter, she began, addressing Ethan, I've gone through your application and the letters of recommendation from the community. It's clear you've formed a strong bond with Lila, and I can see that you're committed to providing her with a stable and loving home. Ethan nodded, his voice steady but emotional. She's changed my life, Your Honor. I just want to give her the chance to have the life she deserves. The judge turned to Lila, her expression softening. And how do you feel about this, Lila? Lila sat up straight in her chair, her new red shoes swinging slightly. I feel like I finally belong somewhere, she said, her voice clear and confident. Ethan's already like a dad to me. I just want it to be official. A murmur of warmth rippled through the courtroom. The judge smiled and signed the final documents. Then it's official, she announced. Congratulations, Ethan and Lila Carter. The room erupted in applause. Mrs. Harper dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, and Lila threw her arms around Ethan, laughing through her tears. We did it, she said, her voice bursting with joy. No, Ethan replied, his voice thick with emotion. We did it together. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of adjustments as Ethan and Lila settled into their new life together. Ethan had prepared a room for her in his small but cozy home, painting the walls a cheerful yellow and filling it with books and toys. Lila's favorite part was the small desk by the window, where she could draw and do her homework. This is all mine, she asked on her first night there, her eyes wide with wonder. It's all yours, Ethan said, leaning against the doorframe. And if there's anything missing, we'll get it. Lila walked around the room, running her fingers over the desk, the bedspread, and the shelves. She turned to Ethan, her face glowing. It's perfect. Thank you. Ethan smiled. You're welcome, kiddo. Now, let's get you settled in. As time passed, Lila began to thrive. With Ethan's support, she excelled in school, her confidence blossoming. She joined the art club and started helping organize events at the Harper house, determined to give back to the place that had once been her home. Ethan, too, found himself growing in ways he hadn't expected. Being Lila's father gave his life a new sense of purpose, and he became more involved in the community. He volunteered at the orphanage, helped organize fundraisers, and even started a mentorship program for children in need. One afternoon, as they worked side by side in the garden they had planted together, Lila turned to Ethan with a thoughtful expression. Do you think we can help other kids the way you helped me? She asked. Ethan paused, wiping the sweat from his brow. I think we can do anything we set our minds to, he said. What are you thinking? Lila hesitated, then smiled. Maybe we can start a project to fix up other orphanages, so more kids can feel like they belong. Ethan's heart swelled with pride. That's a great idea, Lila. Let's do it. Their project, called the Home with Heart Initiative, quickly gained traction. With help from the community, they raised funds to repair and renovate orphanages across the region. Lila became the face of the initiative, her story inspiring others to step up and make a difference. At the first ribbon-cutting ceremony for a newly renovated orphanage, Lila stood on the small stage, holding the microphone with steady hands. When I lived at the Harper House, I used to dream about what it would feel like to have a home, she said. Ethan gave me that. And now, I want to help other kids find their own sense of home. The crowd erupted into applause, many moved to tears by her words. Ethan watched from the sidelines, his heart brimming with pride. In that moment, he knew that their story had become something bigger than either of them. It had become a beacon of hope. As the years went by, Ethan and Lila's bond only deepened. They celebrated milestones together: Lila's first art exhibit, her acceptance into a prestigious college, and eventually, her graduation. Through it all, Ethan remained her biggest supporter, cheering her on at every step. On the day of her college graduation, Lila delivered a speech as the valedictorian. Standing at the podium, she looked out at the audience, her gaze landing on Ethan. When I was a little girl, I didn't think anyone cared about me, she began. I thought I'd spend my life trying to survive, not thrive. But then someone showed me that kindness can change everything. Ethan Carter didn't just buy me a pair of shoes, he gave me the foundation to build my future. And because of him, I learned that we all have the power to make a difference. Ethan wiped at his eyes as the audience gave her a standing ovation. He had never felt prouder. Years later, Lila continued the work they had started together, expanding the Home with Heart initiative into a national organization. Ethan, now retired, spent his days mentoring young volunteers and sharing his story with anyone who would listen. One evening, as they sat together on the porch of their home, Ethan turned to Lila. "You've come a long way, kiddo," he said, his voice filled with affection. "So have you," Lila replied, resting her head on his shoulder. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." Ethan smiled, his heart full. "I think we make a pretty good team." Lila nodded, her voice soft. "The best team." As the Home with Heart initiative expanded, its impact began to ripple across the country. Stories of transformed orphanages, empowered children, and communities coming together filled the news. Lila became a sought-after speaker, traveling to conferences and events to share her journey and advocate for the initiative's mission. At one such event, she stood before a packed auditorium, her heart pounding as she stepped up to the microphone. The crowd fell silent, their attention focused entirely on her. "When I was 10 years old," she began, "I didn't think my life could change. I was just a girl in an orphanage with worn-out shoes, trying to make the best of what I had. But then one person saw me. One person decided that I mattered." She paused, her voice steady but full of emotion. "That person didn't just buy me a pair of shoes. He showed me that even the smallest act of kindness can change everything. Because of him, I'm standing here today. And because of him, thousands of kids across the country now have a chance at a better future." The audience erupted into applause, many moved to tears by her words. Ethan, sitting in the front row, felt a lump form in his throat. Seeing Lila thrive had always been his greatest joy, but hearing her speak so passionately about their shared mission reminded him just how far they'd come. Back home, the two of them continued their work, always finding new ways to make a difference. One evening, as they sat at the kitchen table reviewing plans for the next orphanage renovation, Ethan looked up from the blueprints. "Lila," he said, his voice soft but serious, "you've turned this initiative into something incredible. I hope you know how proud I am of you." Lila smiled, her eyes shining. "I couldn't have done any of it without you." "That's not true," Ethan said. "You've always had this fire in you. I just helped light the match." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Lila spoke again. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "I've been thinking about adding a mentorship program to the initiative. Something that pairs adults with kids who don't have anyone to look up to? Ethan nodded, his expression thoughtful. I think that's a great idea. Every kid deserves someone who believes in them. Just like you believed in me, Lila said, her voice soft. Ethan reached across the table and squeezed her hand. And I always will. The mentorship program, called Guiding Lights, quickly became one of the most impactful aspects of the initiative. Volunteers from all walks of life signed up to mentor kids, sharing their time, skills, and stories to inspire the next generation. Many of the mentors had once been children in the program themselves, eager to give back to the initiative that had shaped their lives. One of those mentors was a young man named Caleb, who had grown up in an orphanage that Ethan and Lila had helped renovate. When Caleb met his mentee, a quiet boy named Liam, he saw a reflection of himself, reserved, unsure, but full of potential. Over time, Caleb and Liam formed a bond that mirrored the one Ethan and Lila shared. Caleb taught Liam how to build model planes, helped him with his schoolwork, and encouraged him to chase his dreams. When Liam was accepted into a prestigious science program, he credited Caleb and the Home with Heart initiative with giving him the confidence to pursue his goals. Years turned into decades, and the Home with Heart initiative became a nationwide movement, with chapters in every state and partnerships with schools, businesses, and community organizations. Lila, now in her 40s, remained at the helm, her passion for the mission as strong as ever. Ethan, though older now, continued to be a steady presence in her life and in the initiative. He attended every ribbon-cutting ceremony, every fundraiser, and every mentorship graduation, always cheering on the kids who had found hope through their work. One afternoon, as they walked through a newly renovated orphanage, Ethan paused to look at a wall filled with photographs of smiling children and their mentors. A plaque at the center of the display caught his eye. In honor of Ethan Carter, whose kindness sparked a movement and changed countless lives. Ethan felt a lump rise in his throat. He turned to Lila, who was watching him with a knowing smile. "You didn't have to do that," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. "Yes, I did," Lila replied. "None of this would exist without you." Ethan shook his head, a small smile playing at his lips. "It exists because you had the courage to dream big. I just gave you a pair of shoes, and those shoes changed everything," Lila said firmly. Never underestimate what one small act of kindness can do. As Ethan's health began to decline, Lila made sure he was surrounded by the people who loved him. The children from the initiative, now grown and thriving, visited often, sharing stories of how his work had impacted their lives. On his last day, Ethan sat in his favorite chair by the window, the sunlight streaming in and warming his face. Lila sat beside him, holding his hand. "You've built something extraordinary," he said softly, his voice full of pride. "So have you," Lila replied, tears streaming down her face. "And I promise to keep building it. For you, for us, and for every kid who needs hope." Ethan smiled, his eyes closing peacefully. "You've always been my heart, kiddo." After Ethan's passing, Lila dedicated herself to preserving his legacy. The initiative launched the Ethan Carter Memorial Fund, which provided grants to communities to improve living conditions for children in need. A statue of Ethan and Lila was erected outside the Harper House, depicting that first moment when Ethan knelt to help her try on her new shoes. Every year, on the anniversary of his passing, Lila returned to the statue, laying a single red rose at its base. She would stand there for a while, reflecting on the man who had changed her life with one simple act of kindness. As she stood there one year, a little girl approached her, holding her mother's hand. The girl pointed at the statue. "Who's that?" she asked. Lila smiled, kneeling down to the child's level. "That's Ethan Carter," she said. "He was a kind man who showed me that even small actions can make a big difference." The girl tilted her head thoughtfully. "I want to be like him." Lila's smile widened. "You can. All it takes is a big heart." In the months following Ethan's passing, the world seemed to unite in honoring his memory. Letters poured into the Home with Heart Initiative headquarters, stories of how Ethan's kindness and vision had transformed lives. Volunteers shared their experiences, orphanage staff sent heartfelt tributes, and countless children wrote notes expressing their gratitude. One such letter came from Sophia, a young woman now studying education at a prestigious university. She had grown up in one of the first orphanages renovated by the initiative. "Dear Lila," it read, "when I was 10 years old, I thought the world had forgotten about me. But then your father came into my life and everything changed. He showed me that I was worth investing in, and because of him, I believed I could be more than my circumstances. Now, I'm training to become a teacher, so I can inspire the next generation just like he inspired me." Lila read the letter aloud during a staff meeting, her voice steady but emotional. "This is why we keep going," she said, her gaze sweeping the room. "Ethan believed in every one of us, and it's up to us to make sure his belief continues to change lives." The team nodded, their resolve strengthened. As the initiative expanded internationally, Lila found herself traveling frequently. She visited communities in Africa, Asia, and South America, witnessing firsthand the incredible resilience of children living in challenging circumstances. In a small village in Ghana, she met Kwame, a 12-year-old boy who had lost his parents and was living with his grandmother. The village had recently received a new school and basketball court through the initiative. Kwame showed Lila his drawings, vibrant depictions of life in his village. "I want to be an artist," he said, his voice filled with determination. "And I'm going to use my art to tell stories about my community." Lila was struck by his passion. She shared his story during a fundraising event back in the US, inspiring donors to contribute to a scholarship fund that would allow kids like Kwame to pursue their dreams. Despite the initiative's success, Lila often felt the weight of her responsibilities. There were days when the challenges seemed insurmountable: bureaucratic delays, funding shortages, and the emotional toll of hearing so many stories of hardship. On one particularly difficult day, she visited the statue of Ethan and sat on the bench nearby, her head in her hands. "I don't know if I can do this, Ethan," she whispered, her voice breaking. "It's so much bigger than me." As she sat there, a young woman approached and hesitated before speaking. "Are you Lila Carter?" she asked. Lila looked up, nodding. "Yes. Can I help you?" The woman smiled. "You already have. My name is Clara, and I grew up at the Harper House. I was one of the kids who used to watch you and Ethan work in the garden. Seeing you step up and make a difference showed me that I could, too. I'm a social worker now, and I help kids find homes. I just wanted to say thank you." Lila felt tears fill her eyes. "Thank you for telling me," she said softly. "It means more than you know." A year later, the initiative hosted its first international conference, bringing together leaders, volunteers, and beneficiaries from around the world. The event was held in a massive convention center, its walls adorned with photos and stories of children who had been helped by the program. Lila stood backstage, her palms slightly damp as she prepared to deliver the keynote address. She took a deep breath, clutching the locket around her neck, a gift from Ethan, engraved with the words, "Play with Heart." Stepping onto the stage, she was greeted by a standing ovation. The sight of thousands of people united by a shared mission filled her with renewed purpose. "When my father bought me a pair of shoes, he didn't think he was starting a movement," she began. "He just saw a kid who needed help and decided to act. That one moment changed the course of my life, and together, we've used that moment to change the lives of countless others." Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "This initiative isn't about one person or one story, it's about all of us. It's about showing up, caring, and believing that small actions can create big change." The crowd erupted into applause, their energy palpable. As Lila stepped off the stage, she felt Ethan's presence, as though he were right beside her, cheering her on. As the years passed, the Home with Heart initiative continued to grow, its impact reaching millions. Lila, now a seasoned leader, found joy in mentoring the next generation of changemakers. She often visited the children's homes and community centers built by the initiative, drawing inspiration from the kids who reminded her so much of herself. One day, while visiting a renovated orphanage in Brazil, she met Isabella, a quiet teenager with a talent for storytelling. Isabella shared a short story she had written about a girl who found hope in the kindness of a stranger. Lila smiled. "This is beautiful," she said. "You have a gift." Isabella blushed. "Do you think so? Sometimes I feel like my stories don't matter." They matter, Lila said firmly. Your words can change the world. Don't ever doubt that. Years later, Isabella published her first novel, dedicating it to Lila and the initiative that had given her the confidence to chase her dreams. The culmination of the initiative's work came at its 50th anniversary celebration. Held at the Harper House, now a symbol of transformation, the event drew people from across the globe. Former orphans, volunteers, and community leaders shared their stories, each one a testament to the power of kindness. Lila, now in her 60s, stood at the podium, her hair streaked with silver but her voice as strong as ever. This is more than an anniversary, she said. It's a celebration of every life that's been touched, every heart that's been healed, and every dream that's been realized. My father taught me that even the smallest act of kindness can create a ripple effect. Today, we are the waves. As she stepped down, the crowd erupted into cheers, their applause echoing through the halls of the place where it all began. After the 50th anniversary celebration, Lila felt a deep sense of gratitude but also an urgent desire to ensure that the initiative would thrive for generations to come. She began focusing on creating sustainable systems within the Home with Heart initiative, building partnerships with global organizations, developing leadership training programs, and expanding its digital outreach to reach even the most remote areas. One of the first programs to launch under this new vision was called Seeds of Hope. It focused on providing orphanages with the resources and skills to become self-sustaining through community gardens, vocational training, and renewable energy initiatives. In a small village in Kenya, Lila visited one of the first orphanages to benefit from the program. The children greeted her with songs and laughter, their pride in their flourishing garden evident as they showed her rows of vibrant vegetables and fruit trees. This garden feeds all of us, a boy named Musa explained. And we sell some of the extra vegetables at the market. It's helping us save for school supplies. Lila knelt beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder. You're not just growing food, Musa. You're growing a future. As the initiative expanded globally, its impact grew in ways Lila could have never imagined. In a refugee camp in Lebanon, a group of teenagers formed a basketball team after their camp received a court from the initiative. For them, the game became more than just a pastime. It was a way to heal, to build friendships, and to dream of a better future. One of the players, a girl named Amal, wrote to Lila after her team won their first tournament. I used to think that my life would always be about surviving, Amal's letter read. But now I know that I can thrive. Your work gave me and my friends hope. Thank you for believing in kids like us. Lila shared Amal's story during a keynote speech at the United Nations, where she spoke about the power of kindness to transform lives. By the end of her speech, world leaders had pledged millions of dollars in support of the initiative, ensuring that its reach would continue to expand. Despite her accomplishments, Lila never lost sight of her roots. She often returned to the Harper House, now a thriving community hub, to reflect on where her journey began. On one such visit, she noticed a small group of children gathered around the statue of Ethan, listening intently as a young volunteer told his story. And that's how one pair of shoes started a movement, the volunteer said, finishing the tale. Lila smiled, stepping closer. It's a good story, isn't it? She said. The children turned, their eyes wide as they recognized her. You're Lila Carter, one of them exclaimed. Is it true? Did Ethan really change your life with just one act of kindness? It's true, Lila said, sitting down on the bench beside them. But it wasn't just about the shoes. It was about what they represented. Someone saw me, believed in me, and reminded me that I mattered. And that's something we can all do for each other. The children listened intently as she spoke, their curiosity and excitement lighting up their faces. Before leaving, Lila handed each of them a small notebook. Use these to write down your dreams, she said. And remember, anything is possible if you play with heart. One of the most ambitious projects of the initiative's later years was the construction of the Global Center for Hope and Kindness, a sprawling campus in Geneva, Switzerland, dedicated to advancing the mission Ethan had started. The center housed classrooms, training facilities, and an interactive museum chronicling the initiative's history. At the grand opening, Lila stood before a crowd of thousands, her heart swelling as she looked out at the sea of faces. People from all over the world had come to celebrate, their diverse backgrounds a testament to the initiative's universal appeal. "This center isn't just a building," Lila said in her opening remarks. "It's a beacon of hope, a reminder that no matter where you come from or what you've been through, kindness can change everything. My father believed that. And because of him, I believe it too." The ceremony concluded with the unveiling of a new statue, a bronze sculpture of Ethan kneeling to help Lila try on her first pair of red shoes. Beneath it was an inscription: "One act of kindness can change the world." In her later years, Lila began writing a memoir to capture the full story of her journey and the initiative's evolution. Titled With Heart, A Journey of Kindness and Courage, the book became an instant bestseller, inspiring readers around the world to embrace the power of compassion. One of the most touching chapters detailed a moment from her childhood that she had never shared publicly before. It described the night she had cried herself to sleep in her tiny room at the Harper house, feeling invisible and forgotten. The next morning, she had met Ethan. "That single moment changed my life," she wrote. "But it also taught me that we all have the power to create those moments for someone else. All it takes is a little courage and a lot of heart." As the years turned into decades, the Home with Heart initiative continued to thrive, its impact reaching new heights. By its 75th anniversary, it had touched the lives of millions, leaving an indelible mark on the world. At the anniversary celebration, Lila, now in her 80s, was honored with a Lifetime Achievement Award. Standing on the stage, she looked out at the audience, her voice filled with gratitude. "This work has never been about one person," she said. "It's about all of us. Together, we've proven that kindness isn't just a feeling, it's an action. And when we choose to act with heart, we change the world." As she stepped down, the audience rose to their feet, their applause echoing through the hall. It was a moment of profound unity, a testament to the enduring power of one small act of kindness. As the years passed, the Home with Heart initiative became more than just an organization. It was a global movement that transcended borders, cultures, and generations. The stories of those whose lives had been changed were now woven into the fabric of its identity. In a quiet corner of a bustling city in Japan, a boy named Haru knelt on a basketball court donated by the initiative. Haru, a shy child with a love for drawing, had always struggled to find his place among his peers. The basketball court had become his sanctuary, a place where he could escape the teasing and focus on something that gave him joy. One day, after a pickup game with the local kids, Haru sat by the sidelines, sketching a picture of the court. His coach, a volunteer from the initiative, sat beside him. "That's really good," the coach said, admiring the sketch. "You've got a talent, sir." Haru blushed. "It's just something I like to do." "It's more than that," the coach said. "Your drawings tell stories. And stories have the power to inspire." Haru's eyes lit up. For the first time, he felt like his art could mean something. Years later, Haru became a graphic designer, creating illustrations for Home with Heart initiative campaigns that inspired children around the world. In South Africa, a young woman named Ayanda stood before her graduating class, ready to deliver a speech that would mark a significant milestone in her life. Ayanda had grown up in an orphanage that had been renovated through the initiative. The improvements had given her a safe place to study, grow, and dream. "When I was a little girl," Ayanda began, her voice steady, "I used to think the world was a place where only the strongest survived. But then something incredible happened. A group of strangers came into my life and showed me that kindness is a strength of its own. They gave me a chance to see the world differently, to believe in possibilities I never imagined." As the crowd applauded, Ayanda glanced at the banner behind her that bore the initiative's logo and the words, "With heart, anything is possible." She knew her story was just one of many, but it was a testament to the far-reaching impact of Ethan's vision. Back in the United States, the Global Center for Hope and Kindness became a hub for innovation and education. Scholars, community leaders, and changemakers gathered there to collaborate on projects aimed at solving pressing social challenges. The center's library, named after Lila, housed an extensive collection of books, articles, and multimedia resources on the power of compassion and community building. One day, A group of young leaders from various countries sat in the library, exchanging ideas. Among them was a girl from Brazil named Sofia, who had been inspired by the initiative to start her own community garden project in her hometown. "I want to show people that small steps can lead to big changes," Sofia said, her enthusiasm infectious. "If we start with what we have, we can create something amazing." The others nodded, sharing their own stories and ideas. Together, they brainstormed ways to take their local projects to a global scale, fueled by the belief that they were part of something much larger than themselves. Meanwhile, Lila continued to travel, meeting with children, volunteers, and community leaders. During one visit to a remote village in Nepal, she met Priya, a teenager who had started a literacy program for younger children using books donated by the initiative. "I want them to know the power of words," Priya explained. "When you can read, you can learn anything. And when you can learn, you can dream." Lila was deeply moved. She spent hours with Priya, discussing ways to expand the program and ensure that more children in the region had access to books and educational resources. Later, as she boarded the small plane that would take her to her next destination, Lila thought of Ethan. She imagined how proud he would be of everything their work had accomplished. The thought filled her with both joy and a bittersweet longing. As the 100th anniversary of the initiative approached, a special task force was formed to plan a celebration that would honor its history and look toward its future. Lila, now retired but still involved as an advisor, was invited to participate. The planning meetings were a mix of nostalgia and excitement. Stories of Ethan's original act of kindness were shared alongside updates on the initiative's current projects. One idea quickly gained traction: to create the documentary that would capture the full scope of the initiative's impact. The documentary, titled The Ripple Effect: How Kindness Changed the World, premiered at the centennial celebration. It featured interviews with individuals who had been touched by the initiative, archival footage of Ethan and Lila, and breathtaking visuals of the communities that had been transformed. In one particularly poignant scene, an elderly Lila sat in her garden, reflecting on her life. "People often ask me if I ever imagined all this would happen," she said, her voice soft but full of conviction. "And the truth is, I didn't. But Ethan did. He believed that one small act could create a ripple effect. And he was right. That ripple became a wave, and that wave changed the world." The centennial celebration culminated in the unveiling of a monument in the heart of New York City. The monument, a towering sculpture of interlocking hearts, symbolized the interconnectedness of humanity and the power of compassion to bridge divides. As the crowd gathered around the monument, Lila's great-granddaughter, Emma, stood at the microphone. Emma had followed in her family's footsteps, dedicating her life to continuing the initiative's mission. "My great-grandfather taught us that kindness isn't just something you feel, it's something you do," Emma said, her voice echoing through the square. "This monument is a reminder that we all have the power to make a difference. Let's honor his legacy by choosing kindness every day." As the years turned into centuries, the Home with Heart initiative remained a guiding light for those who believed in the transformative power of empathy and action. Schools taught Ethan and Lila's story as part of their curriculum, and the initiative's logo became a universal symbol of hope. One quiet evening, in a future far beyond the present, a group of children gathered around a digital display in a museum dedicated to changemakers. The exhibit featured holographic images of Ethan and Lila, along with an interactive timeline of the initiative's milestones. "Can we really change the world like they did?" one child asked, wide-eyed. An older guide smiled. "Of course. It starts with a simple act: a smile, a helping hand, a kind word. Every big change begins with something small. Just like Ethan Carter's shoes." The children nodded, their faces filled with determination. As they moved on to the next exhibit, the guide glanced back at the holograms of Ethan and Lila, their faces frozen in a moment of hope and inspiration. And so, their legacy lived on, not just in the lives they touched, but in the hearts of everyone who dared to believe that kindness could change the world. Years after the centennial celebration, the Home with Heart initiative had become an integral part of global culture. Its story was not just a tale of kindness but a blueprint for how communities could unite to create lasting change. Children in schools studied it as an example of how small acts could spark monumental transformations. One such classroom was in a bustling city in India, where a teacher stood before her students, holding a book titled The Ripple Effect: How Kindness Changed the World. "Can anyone tell me what started this movement?" the teacher asked. A boy in the front row raised his hand eagerly. "A man bought shoes for a little girl." "That's right," the teacher said with a smile. "But why is that important?" The boy thought for a moment before replying, "Because he saw her when no one else did." The teacher nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Exactly. Kindness begins with seeing people, not just their needs, but their humanity. Remember that, and you can change the world too." In a small village in Peru, a group of women gathered around a table, discussing plans for a new community center funded by the initiative. One of the women, Rosa, had grown up in an orphanage supported by the program. Now a mother of two, she was determined to give back. "We'll teach classes here," Rosa said, her hands moving animatedly as she explained her vision. "Not just academics, but skills, gardening, sewing, even computer literacy. Everyone in our village should feel empowered." As the group worked late into the evening, a young girl peeked through the doorway. She carried a worn notebook, its pages filled with sketches and notes. "Can I help?" she asked shyly. Rosa smiled, motioning for the girl to join them. "Of course. Every idea matters." The girl's face lit up, and she placed her notebook on the table. As the group leaned in to review her sketches for the center's layout, Rosa thought of the kindness that had shaped her own life. She silently vowed to continue passing it forward. Meanwhile, in a sprawling city in Nigeria, a young man named Tund sat in a crowded cafe, preparing for a meeting that would change his life. Tund, a former participant in the initiative's mentorship program, had recently developed a mobile app designed to connect volunteers with local projects in need of support. His idea had garnered attention from international organizations, and today he was pitching it to investors. As Tund rehearsed his presentation, he thought back to his mentor, a man named Caleb, who had once told him, "The best way to honor those who help you is to help others in return." Tund took a deep breath, his nerves settling as he stepped into the meeting room. Hours later, he emerged with a smile on his face and funding secured. The app, named Heartline, would go on to revolutionize how people around the world connected with opportunities to make a difference. Back at the Global Center for Hope and Kindness, a new generation of leaders gathered for an annual summit. Among them was Ava, a young woman from Canada who had been inspired by Lila's memoir to start a program for foster children transitioning to adulthood. During a panel discussion, Ava shared her story. "When I read Lila's words, I felt like she was speaking directly to me. She reminded me that no matter how small you feel, you have the power to make a difference. That's why I started my program, to make sure every foster kid knows they're not alone." The audience erupted in applause, many moved by Ava's determination. After the panel, she was approached by several attendees eager to collaborate, proving once again how Ethan and Lila's vision continued to inspire action. In her later years, Lila spent more time reflecting on her journey. She often returned to the places where the initiative had its roots, including the Harper House. Though it had long since been transformed into a thriving community center, walking its halls still brought back memories of her childhood. One day, during a visit to the Harper House, Lila found herself sitting on a bench outside, watching children play on the lawn. A young boy approached her, holding a book he had borrowed from the center's library. "Are you the lady from the statue?" he asked, his voice filled with curiosity. Lila smiled. "Yes, I am. Is it true that someone bought you shoes and that's why all this happened?" the boy asked, gesturing toward the bustling center behind them. "It's true," Lila said. "But it wasn't just about the shoes. It was about someone seeing me, believing in me, and showing me that I mattered." The boy tilted his head thoughtfully. "Do you think I can do something like that someday?" Lila's smile widened. "I know you can. All it takes is a little kindness and a lot of heart." As the Home with Heart initiative celebrated its 150th anniversary, a holographic exhibit was unveiled at the United Nations headquarters. The exhibit, titled The Power of One Act, chronicled the initiative's history, showcasing stories of the countless lives it had touched. World leaders, educators, and activists attended the opening ceremony, marveling at the initiative's enduring impact. Among them was a descendant of Lila's, a young woman named Elise, who had taken up the mantle of leadership within the organization. Elise, a reporter asked during an interview, "What's the secret to the initiative's longevity?" Elise smiled. "It's simple. We've never forgotten where it started, with one act of kindness. That's what keeps us grounded and what inspires us to keep going." The reporter nodded, scribbling notes. "And what do you hope for the future?" "I hope we continue to prove that compassion is our greatest strength," Elise replied. "Because when we lead with heart, there's nothing we can't accomplish." In the centuries that followed, the Home with Heart initiative evolved with the times, but its mission remained unchanged. It became a symbol of humanity's potential to create positive change, inspiring movements, innovations, and collaborations that shaped the world. The story of Ethan and Lila was taught not just in history books but in virtual reality simulations, where students could step into the shoes of both the giver and the receiver, experiencing firsthand the power of kindness. In one such classroom, a teacher asked her students, "What do you think the world would be like if Ethan hadn't bought those shoes?" A girl raised her hand. "I think it would be missing something important. Hope." The teacher nodded. "Exactly. That's why it's up to all of us to carry on his legacy. Every act of kindness, no matter how small, has the power to change the world." And so, the legacy of Ethan and Lila Carter lived on, not just in the programs they started or the monuments built in their honor, but in the hearts and actions of people everywhere. Their story proved that even the simplest gesture could spark a movement, creating ripples that would echo through time. As generations passed, one truth remained constant: kindness, when shared, grows. And as long as people believed in that truth, the world would always have hope.